At its peak, Pride Fighting Championships looked untouchable. Tens of thousands of fans, the biggest stars in the world. A level of spectacle mixed martial arts had never seen before. Then, on March 27, 2007, Pride was publicly announced as being acquired. Not as a death sentence, but as the beginning of something bigger. Dream fights, global expansion, UFC and Pride under one roof. But within roughly a year, that promise had turned into a legal war. One side claimed the seller failed to cooperate with background checks. The other claimed the buyer never intended to keep Pride alive. So the question is not just, why did Pride disappear? The question is darker. Was Pride saved or erased? And the answer starts years earlier, inside an empire built on spectacle, money, secrecy, and one television deal that held everything together. Pride's story begins on October 11th, 1997, at the Tokyo Dome. The first event was built around one fight: Japanese pro wrestling star Nobuhiko Takada against Rickson Gracie, a member of the family that had already changed combat sports through the earliest UFC events in America. That first show was promoted under the banner Kakutogi Revolution Spirits, or KRS. The crowd was reported in the high 40,000s. For a sport that barely had a name yet, that was enormous. This was not a small gym show. This was not a fringe experiment. This was a new combat sport being introduced like a national event. Behind the rise were figures including Hiromichi Momose, Naoto Morishita, and Nobuyuki Sakakibara. What started that night grew into Pride Fighting Championships, later promoted by Dream Stage Entertainment. And what followed was not just the rise of a fight promotion, it was the creation of a world. Pride understood something earlier than almost anyone else in MMA. Fights were only part of the product. The entrances mattered, the music mattered, the lighting mattered, the feeling mattered. The UFC was building a sport for American pay-per-view. Pride was building a spectacle for Japanese television. And for a while, Pride's version looked bigger. Fedor Emelianenko, Mirko Krokop Filipovic, Wanderlei Silva, Mauricio Shogun Rua, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Kazushi Sakuraba. These were not just fighters. Inside Pride, they felt mythological. The rules were different. The ring was different. The audience was different. And the tournaments made everything feel urgent.
By 2000, Pride had introduced the Grand Prix, brutal brackets, elite fighters, and sometimes multiple fights in one night. It was not just about winning one matchup. It was about surviving a gauntlet. And for elite fighters, Pride offered something incredibly valuable, another serious place to go. If a fighter did not like a UFC deal, Pride was not some tiny alternative. Pride had stars, money, television, prestige, and a completely different kind of stardom. That competition gave fighters leverage. And when Pride collapsed, that leverage changed. But before the collapse, Pride still had one more level to reach. In August of 2002, Pride partnered with kickboxing giant K1 for Shockwave at Tokyo National Stadium. The attendance is disputed. Some records put it above 91,000. Others put it closer to 71,000. Either number is staggering. And because it was a joint Pride and K1 event, it should not be treated as Pride alone. But visually, it sent a clear message. Japanese combat sports could stage something bigger than anything MMA had ever seen.
By the mid-2000s, Pride did not look like a niche promotion getting lucky. From the outside, it looked like the future of MMA had moved to Japan. But empires rarely collapse from the outside first. They usually crack underneath. In January of 2003, Dream Stage Entertainment president Naoto Morishita was found dead in a Tokyo hotel room, reportedly by suicide.
His death left a sudden vacancy at the top of a company still in its ascent. Nobuyuki Sakakibara stepped in as the new public face of Pride. That is where this moment belongs in the story, not as proof of a hidden conspiracy, not as a murder clue, but as a leadership shock inside a company whose business model was about to become much more vulnerable. Because the scandal that damaged Pride did not begin with a police raid, a government indictment, or a courtroom. It began with a New Year's Eve fight card and a fighter who appeared where Pride did not want him to be.
New Year's Eve in Japan was the biggest night of the year for combat sports. Promotions competed head-to-head for television audiences. Pride had a show, K1 had a show, and Antonio Inoki, the pro wrestling legend, had his own competing event. At the center of the dispute was Fedor Emelianenko, Pride's heavyweight champion and one of the most important fighters in the world. Pride maintained that Fedor remained contractually tied to the organization. Others around the dispute challenged that version. But the result was simple. Fedor ended up fighting on an Inoki-promoted rival card instead of Pride's own New Year's Eve show. Years later, Seiya Kawamata, a promoter connected to the rival event, gave an interview to the Japanese tabloid Shukan Gendai. In his version of events, disputed, tabloid published, and never proven in court, the fallout did not stay within normal business boundaries. Kawamata alleged that figures connected to organized crime threatened him over the incident. Other accounts surrounding the same dispute included even more serious allegations of coercion involving Fedor's representatives. The details differ depending on who is telling the story. None of it was proven in court, and that matters.
A tabloid allegation is not a verdict. A bitter business dispute is not proof. A lawsuit is not truth. But in business, perception can be almost as damaging as proof. In April of 2006, Shukan Gendai began publishing allegations connecting Pride's previous ownership to organized crime. Sakakibara denied the allegations and reportedly threatened legal action. The magazine's reporting went further, alleging that undisclosed power brokers had influence behind the scenes. Again, those claims were denied. They were disputed. They were never established in court. But here is the part that matters. Pride did not need the allegations to be proven in court for them to become a business disaster. Pride's empire did not run only on ticket sales. It ran on television. And when the scandal reached Fuji TV, the entire business model started to shake.
By June of 2006, Fuji Television, the broadcaster that had carried Pride's events for years, terminated its contract with Dreamstage Entertainment. Officially, Fuji cited a breach of contract, not the organized crime allegations directly. That distinction matters, but the timing was impossible to ignore. The allegations had exploded in April. Fuji walked away in June. For Pride, that was the real turning point. Because Fuji was not just a broadcaster, it was one of Pride's most important revenue streams and the gateway to mainstream Japanese audiences. These were not all hardcore fans buying pay-TV. These were casual viewers, mainstream viewers, people who tuned in because Pride was part of the television culture. When Fuji left, Pride did not just lose a platform. It lost reach. It lost legitimacy. It lost money. And it lost the engine that made stadium spectacle financially possible. That is where the collapse really begins. Not when fans stopped caring, but when the television machine stopped carrying the product. Without Fuji, Pride tried to keep moving. It still had stars. It still had spectacle. It still had a brand recognized by MMA fans around the world. So Pride tried to reinvent itself in America.
In October of 2006, it debuted in Las Vegas at the Thomas and Mack Center. A second Las Vegas show followed in February of 2007. The live gates were respectable. The hardcore fans showed up. But America was not Japan. Pride's Japanese model had been built around mainstream television spectacle. The American model ran through pay-per-view, and Pride never broke through in the United States at the level it needed.
For a promotion built on stadium spectacle, failure arrived in a quieter form. Not empty arenas, not bad fights, but a business model that could not replace what Fuji television had provided. That is when the most dangerous buyer appeared. The one company that understood Pride's value better than anyone, because Pride had been its greatest rival. By early 2007, Pride was wounded. Its television foundation was gone. Its American rescue attempt had not replaced what it lost, and its ownership was looking for an exit. The buyer that stepped in was the ownership group behind the UFC. On March 27, 2007, Sakakibara and Nobuhiko Takeda announced that Lorenzo Fertitta had agreed to acquire Pride's assets. Not a clean merger, an asset acquisition. But publicly, it was sold with the language of something bigger. Dream fights, global growth, two great brands under one umbrella. The deal was widely reported around $65 million, or simply as less than $70 million, though the amount was not publicly disclosed. At the time, the optimistic version sounded incredible. UFC champions against Pride champions. American pay-per-view muscle with Japanese spectacle. The two strongest MMA brands in the world finally working together. Publicly, there was talk of the brands operating side by side, compared by some to an AFL-NFL style arrangement. But legally, this was still an asset acquisition. And what happened next is why the sale still divides MMA fans. The public pitch was preservation. The result was disappearance. In early 2008, nearly a year after the sale was announced, the Fertitta-side Pride FC worldwide entity filed suit against Sakakibara and DreamStage Entertainment in Nevada State Court. The complaint alleged that Sakakibara had failed to cooperate with background checks required under the sale agreement. It also alleged that this failure amounted to fraud. This was a lawsuit allegation, not a court-proven fact. The important point is not that the lawsuit proved anything. It did not. The important point is that the background check dispute showed how much unresolved reputational risk still surrounded the Pride deal long after the press conference was over. And to explain why those background checks mattered, the complaint pointed back to the earlier Shukan Gendai allegations connecting Pride's previous ownership to organized crime. Again, citing those allegations in a lawsuit did not make them true, but it showed they were significant enough as a due diligence issue to put in writing. Sakakibara did not stay quiet for long. On April 2nd, 2008, Sakakibara, Uban, and DreamStage Holdings sued Zuffa, the Fertittas, and related Pride entities in U.S. District Court. Their complaint told the opposite story. According to Sakakibara's side, Lorenzo Fertitta had promised that Pride would remain a serious global brand. The lawsuit alleged that promise was never sincere. It argued that the real plan had always been to acquire the rival, absorb its fighters, take control of its video library, and remove the UFC's most important global competitor. That was Sakakibara's side's allegation and interpretation. The public record does not conclusively prove Zuffa's intent. And here is the part that keeps the story from being simple. The Fertitta side entity sued first. Sakakibara's betrayal claim was, legally, a counterattack. That does not make it false.
it does not make it true. It makes it contested. Both sides had money at stake. Both sides had reputations at stake. Both sides had reasons to tell the version that protected themselves. That is what makes Pride's ending so strange. The fights gave us clear winners and losers. The business collapse did not. The deal closed. The fighters moved. The office shut down. The brand disappeared. And the unanswered questions stayed behind. It is easy to remember Pride as a highlight reel. The stumps, the soccer kicks, the walkouts, the tournaments, the aura. But Pride's disappearance mattered for more than nostalgia. It changed the business map of MMA. For elite fighters in that era, Pride was not just another promotion. It was the strongest global alternative to the UFC. If one offer was bad, there was somewhere else to go. Somewhere with stars, somewhere with television, somewhere with money, somewhere with prestige. That kind of alternative matters in any labor market. It affects negotiations. It affects contracts. It affects what fighters believe they are worth. Pride's collapse did not create every fighter pay debate that came after it. And it was not the last credible alternative promotion MMA would ever see. Strikeforce, Bellator, and others would matter later. But Pride's combination of scale, money, prestige, and global talent was different for its era. When the UFC absorbed Pride's fighters, footage, and history, it did not just gain content, it gained leverage.
Pride did not die in the ring. It did not die because the fights stopped mattering. It did not die because the fans stopped caring. It did not die because the spectacle failed. It died in television offices, in contracts, in court filings, in allegations that were never fully proven but still changed the future of the company. The full truth behind Pride's doors may never be known. Tabloid reporting is not a verdict. Lawsuits are not truth. And almost everyone involved had a reason to protect themselves. But the reaction was real. Fuji walked away. The television money vanished. The American pivot failed. The rival bought the assets. And one of the most spectacular promotions in combat sports history disappeared. Pride's final legacy is not just what happened under its lights. It is what happened after the lights went out. Because once the strongest global alternative of that era was gone, the balance of power in MMA changed. And what happened to fighter pay after that is where this story stops being history and starts becoming the sport we are still watching today.